This video is for dynamic testing, dynamic compression testing on an engine. So I'm going to demonstrate how to effectively check an engine for dynamic compression. On this particular test, there's usually no specifications for it. So what you do is you have to average all of your cylinders together to see if there is an issue. But sometimes a dynamic compression test can pick up things that a static compression test won't. And so basically, just by the term dynamic, that means that the engine's going to be operational. So the engine's going to actually be running when we do this test. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that for you. First thing we're going to do is we're going to install all the spark plugs except for the cylinder that we're going to be testing. And so this is that little tool I was showing you. It's kind of nice because you can twist it around and you twist this end here and it starts the spark plug in. Cost about 20 bucks on Amazon. I would highly recommend that you get one of these things if you're going to do a lot of engine type work and do removing and replacing spark plugs, because getting the spark plugs into the cylinders is really a breeze with this thing. So all I have to do is just tighten them all in there finger tight, just like that, and then once I get all the rest of the spark plugs in, we'll pick up the video. Okay, for this test what I'm going to do is I'm going to install my compression gauge again. So I've got one spark plug left undone, all the rest of them are all hooked up into the engine. And so I'm going to hook up my compression gauge, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the engine. So give me a minute and I will do that. One of the things that you always want to make sure you do is make sure you ground out the spark plug wire that you're testing. So I've got a just a ground wire stuck in the ground, or in the spark plug wire, and then I've got it running over to ground. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the compression gauge. We're going to start the engine up and see how the see where the compression's at. So we'll start with 0. Okay, once the engine starts up, then what we want to do is we want to zero it out a couple of times. If you notice, it's running at about 80 psi. Okay. So it's running at 80 psi dynamic compression. I've done the dynamic compression test, and I've written all the results up here on the board. So this is the one that you were watching me, actually this is the one you were watching me test, which was at 80 psi. And most of them were running right at 80 except for one, cylinder number 5. It was actually at about 82, as near as I could tell, because on a dynamic compression test that needle bounces a little bit. But this one was slightly higher than all the rest of them. All the rest of them were pretty much the same, which tells me that all these cylinders are pretty much contributing about the same to the firing order on each one of them. So a dynamic compression test is a good thing to do. It's not necessarily one of the more popular tests. In my experience in the field, I haven't done a whole bunch of dynamic compression tests. Usually I do a dynamic compression test when I'm trying to find an odd problem that doesn't show up with any of the other tests. Some of the things that show up with a dynamic compression test that may not with a static is things like sticking valves and things like that. So maybe you have a valve seat that's not working properly or something. That's usually what you'll see with a dynamic compression test. But anyway, this wraps up dynamic compression.